Hey guys, sorry for the length of it today, but here we are. So, we're going to go over a couple of basic literary terms that help us understand poetry, and we're going to go ahead and get moving. So, the ones we're going to go over today are, I'm actually skipping a couple. We'll do the others tomorrow, and for the interest of time. Metaphor, simile, line breaks, enjambment. I'm skipping allusion, assonance, and consonants, and then talking about basic vocabulary. Today, just speaker and stanza. So metaphor, simile, you've done this a million times, right? They are figurative comparisons. It's very important that they be figurative and not literal, right? So a literal comparison would, it's not a simile if you say he was as strong as a strong guy. Like that's not no longer figurative. It's just, oh, yep, well, sure. It's not a metaphor if you go, he was a king because he was. It's not a metaphor if you get it. If it's literal, not metaphorical, right? Metaphor is always figurative, which is weird because in that poem we just read today, death is a beige Mercedes sedan is interesting because the metaphor, it being that the beige Mercedes sedan is itself death, it just skirts the line of the literal, right? Because, now that I'm thinking about that poem, it seems to me that she's in that beige Mercedes sedan and it gets crushed on the front and, she loses someone or she's injured, Another one from T.S. Eliot's love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Great metaphor that it demonstrates what he thinks of himself, right? Look at this. I should have been a pair of ragged claws. Is this a guy who feels good about himself? What's the image here? A pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. What scuttles across the floor of the sea? Is it a apex predator or a bottom feeder? Well, we can start to see through that metaphor how the speaker feels about himself. Hint, is nor so good. He does not like. Next. Oh, here's another T.S. Eliot poem. This one's got just great similes in it that sort of help use figurative language to enhance meaning, right? We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. That's metaphor. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless. Here's the simile. As wind in dry grass, or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. One of my favorite poets, one of my favorite poems of his as well. But yeah, our dried voices when we whisper together are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Again, kind of that emphasis on dryness, that emphasis on lonesomeness. They're leaning together in the first stanza, right? They're whispering together, but it's all these very empty images. Wind in dry grass, right? Nobody's there. It's just a kind of blowing, right? Rat's feet over broken glass is just this kind of pattering, this clinking of glass by tiny feet of vermin, So again, similar to Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, this is a speaker who doesn't think much of himself, or at least he's lost too much of himself to think anything anymore. He is shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Emptiness we get. And a couple of devices that help make a poem are line breaks, line breaks are where the line stops and another line starts. It's a pretty self-explanatory term, right? Line breaks. Enjambment is a function of line breaks. That happens quite a bit where you end that line in the middle of a phrase or grammatical unit and you split that in half. There was a great one in in Erstling, the poem that we read together just now. I want to become what I was before the accident. That enjambment helped me kind of interpret the middle of the poem, right? That's the moment of the accident for me. And because of that enjambment, I get two meanings out of I want to become and I want to become what I was before the accident. It emphasizes that split and thus creates two new meanings. Very cool. Very cool work, enjambment. Oh, this is something I noticed in a lot of your responses to yesterday's questions. When you're speaking about the voice of the poem, the person saying the poem, not the narrator or author or poet, we refer to that voice as the poem's speaker, the speaker. I actually have a grammatical mistake here. I'm just noticing. Its is wrong. It should be its, no apostrophe. Its with an apostrophe means it is. So I'm an idiot. Garim, as the children say. Also, yeah. So voice of the poem is the speaker. Always refer to them as the speaker. And similarly, just to get like the proper things to call different stuff, a grouping of lines that functions as a single unit, it's called a stanza. A stanza there. So when you get to a group of lines, whoops, can you guys see that? I hope not. Whatever. Anyhow, grouping of lines, you call it a stanza. And I'll show you an example. Here's As I Ebbed with the Ocean of Life by Walt Whitman. Sorry, I'm showing you so many American poets. I'm trying to focus mostly on Asian American poets, since technically the poetry unit is also our Asian literature unit. Hence, Chen Chen and today your three options are all Asian American poets. However, Walt Whitman is not, but he's significantly older than most of these poets. He is a dead white guy. Hooray! Poetry. All by dead white guys. It's not. So Walt Whitman here, this is interesting, and I love that word apparently. This is an interesting poem. It's quite a long poem. You see the number 1 there. That's because this is actually a grouping of stanzas known as a section. Section 1 of As I Ebbed with the Ocean of Life. Now, section 1 consists of 2 stanzas. Well, let's see. The first is 9 lines. The second is 8. 9 and 8. That's 14. Interesting. That could be a sonnet, couldn't it? Nope, because 9 plus 8 is not 14, it's 17. And that's great math, Mr. B. So, as I ebbed with the ocean of life, as I wended the shores I know, as I walked where the ripples continually wash you Paumanok, where they rustle up hoarse and sibilant, where the fierce old mother endlessly cries for her castaways, I, musing late in the autumn day, gazing off southward, held by this electric self, out of the pride of which I utter poems, was seized by the spirit that trails in the lines underfoot, the rim, the sediment that stands for all the water and all the land of the globe. That's stanza 1. Stanza 2. Fascinated, my eyes reverting from the south, dropped to follow these slender windrows, chaff, straw, splinters of wood, weeds, and the sea gluten, scum, scales from shining rocks, leaves of salt lettuce left by the tide, miles walking, the sound of breaking waves the other side of me. Paumanok there, and then, as I thought, the old thought of likenesses. These you presented to me, you fish-shaped island. As I wended the shores I know, as I walked with that electric, self-seeking types. So, we get this 2 images. What he, at first, setting the scene as I was walking, as I did this, as that, I was seized by this spirit, and I fascinated, watched the electric, self-seeking types as I watched the cavalcade of sea wreckage, right? So that's really all I'm going to do with you guys today. By the way, beautiful imagery in that second stanza. Just great stuff. I will leave you with that and see you next time. Goodbye forever. I hope you took notes. If you didn't, go back and write down this stuff. What are you doing?